The anomaly did not announce itself with alarms or red banners. It arrived the way all dangerous things did now, silently, buried beneath routine, disguised as noise. At 2:17 Zulu, in a windowless analysis room 3 levels below the NATO Maritime Command facility in Northwood, a junior acoustic analyst named Elise Markovich paused a playback she had heard hundreds of times before. The waveform on her screen, an unremarkable ribbon of blues and greens, had just done something it shouldn't have. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It hesitated. A fraction of a second. A compression artifact, perhaps. Or a software glitch. Elise rewound the file and played it again, isolating the frequency band between 12 and 18 Hz. The hesitation returned, consistent, precise, almost deliberate. It wasn't random noise. It wasn't biologic. And it wasn't any commercial or military propulsion signature catalogued in the Alliance's databases. She frowned, tagging the clip with a provisional marker, anomalous/review required. The file itself was old, archived passive sonar data from a North Atlantic patrol conducted 9 months earlier by a Norwegian P-8 Poseidon. At the time, it had been logged as nothing more than deep ocean interference, another whisper among the constant hum of the sea. But Elise had been reassigned to a new internal project, Project Trident Vault, an effort to reprocess historical sonar data using updated machine learning models trained to detect ultra-low signature vessels. The model had flagged this file at 1:58. Elise was the first human to hear it. She leaned closer to the screen, fingers hovering over the console. The sound was faint, almost apologetic, a low, modulated resonance that rose and fell with mechanical patience. It wasn't cavitation. It wasn't turbulence. It was disciplined. Controlled. Impossible, she murmured. Russian submarines were loud by NATO standards. Quieter than in the Cold War, yes, but still imperfect. Even their most modern boats, the Yazan-class attack subs, left acoustic fingerprints NATO knew by heart. This sound didn't match any of them. Elise pulled up the metadata. Coordinates. Time stamps. Water temperature. Depth layers. Then she noticed something else. Embedded in the file, deep in the raw data structure, beneath layers of compression, was a pattern that shouldn't exist at all. A secondary modulation, too regular to be natural, too complex to be accidental. It wasn't sound in the traditional sense. It was data. Her heartbeat quickened. Sonar files were not supposed to carry payloads. Passive acoustic recordings were inert, digital fossils of sound waves. Yet here, riding beneath the ocean's whisper, was something shaped. Structured. Intentional. Elise didn't escalate immediately. She knew better. Analysts who cried wolf didn't last long in Northwood. Instead, she duplicated the file, stripped it of identifiers, and ran it through a legacy decoder used only for training exercises. The output froze her in place. Hexadecimal strings began to scroll across the screen, resolving into compressed blocks. Encrypted. Modern. Military grade. Someone had hidden information inside the sound of the sea. 3 hours later, the anomaly had a name. Black Current. That was the internal designation assigned by Commander James Holloway, head of NATO's Undersea Threat Assessment Group, when Elise finally brought the file to him. Holloway was a career submariner turned analyst, a man who trusted data more than instincts, and even he went pale when the decrypted preview rendered its first intelligible fragment. Not coordinates. Not text. Schematics, partial, incomplete, but unmistakable. Cross-sectional outlines of a submarine hull unlike anything in NATO's recognition manuals. The curvature was wrong. The internal compartmentalization defied conventional design logic. Reactor placement suggested a heat management solution NATO engineers had theorized but never seen implemented. This isn't possible, Holloway said quietly. Elise stood rigid at attention, though no one had ordered her to. "Sir, the acoustic profile doesn't match anything we have. The data was embedded using low-frequency amplitude modulation. Whoever did this knew exactly how our archival systems store and compress sonar." Holloway rubbed his temples. "You're telling me someone used our own ocean against us? Hid a message in the noise we ignore?" "Yes, sir." "Who?" Elise hesitated. "The source vector suggests Eastern Atlantic origin. The acoustic signature overlays match Russian patrol corridors. But the encryption methodology doesn't match known Russian naval cyber doctrine." That was the moment Holloway realized the danger wasn't just technological. It was political. By dawn, the file had been replicated into 3 isolated systems under NATO's highest classification tier. A small circle of admirals, intelligence chiefs, and civilian defense officials were briefed under conditions of extreme compartmentalization. No emails. No phones. No notes leaving the room. The consensus was immediate and terrifying. The data fragments weren't stolen. They were leaked. And not carelessly. The schematics corresponded to a rumored Russian platform NATO had only ever referred to in speculative papers, a next-generation strategic submarine designed for extended autonomous operations beneath the Arctic ice. Ultra-quiet. Deep diving. Capable of operating beyond the effective range of existing detection nets. If the fragments were genuine, and preliminary validation suggested they were, then someone inside Russia's naval-industrial complex had chosen to expose the crown jewels of Moscow's undersea deterrent. But why embed them in NATO sonar archives? The answer came from an unexpected place. A liaison officer from Ukraine's Naval Intelligence Directorate, seconded to NATO after months of political wrangling, reviewed the anomaly at Holloway's request. Captain Andriy Kovalenko studied the waveform, the data layers, the encryption scaffolding, and smiled grimly. "This is not a broadcast," Kovalenko said. "It's a dead drop." "A what?" one admiral asked. "A message hidden where only a very specific audience would ever look," Kovalenko replied. "Someone didn't want the world to hear this. They wanted you to find it." Holloway's voice was tight. "Are you saying Ukraine is responsible?" Kovalenko shook his head. "No. I'm saying whoever did this understands NATO's habits. Your blind spots. Your arrogance. And they understand Russia's secrets well enough to betray them." He paused, then added softly, "That usually means an insider. Or someone who killed one." As analysts worked through the night, more fragments surfaced, each buried in separate sonar files across different patrol zones, all archived months earlier, all dismissed at the time as nothing. Together, they formed a mosaic: propulsion concepts, materials science notes, deployment doctrine annotations. Not enough to build the submarine. Enough to destroy its secrecy. By the time Moscow realized something was wrong, the sound had already escaped the ocean. And the sea, as it always had, kept its silence, while the world above it began to shift. Moscow learned of the leak the same way it learned of most disasters, too late, and from someone else. At 6:40 Moscow Standard Time, a sealed envelope marked, "of special importance," was placed on the polished oak desk of Admiral Viktor Sokolov, Deputy Commander of the Russian Navy. It contained no explanation, only a transcript summary translated from intercepted NATO chatter and a single chilling sentence highlighted in red. Sokolov didn't need clarification. His hands, steady through decades of service, trembled almost imperceptibly as he reread the line. Hull geometry was not something outsiders validated. It was the most guarded aspect of the program whose name was never spoken aloud, even inside the General Staff. A submarine that officially did not exist. A doctrine Moscow denied pursuing. He stood, walked to the window overlooking the Moskva River, and stared at the gray water as if expecting it to confess. Within an hour, the denials began. The Ministry of Defense issued a bland statement accusing NATO of routine hysteria and misinformation. State media followed suit, rolling out retired admirals and compliant analysts who scoffed at the idea of a revolutionary Russian submarine. Graphics appeared showing outdated NATO vessels, suggesting the alliance was projecting its own technological failures, but inside the Kremlin, panic spread like a pressure crack along a welded seam. An emergency session of the Security Council convened behind closed doors. Phones were confiscated. Curtains drawn. The president listened in silence as intelligence chiefs spoke over one another, each trying to distance their department from responsibility. This information could not have been accessed externally, said the head of naval counterintelligence. Our networks are air-gapped. Then your air gaps are compromised, snapped another. No, a third voice cut in. The problem is not access. It is intent. The room fell quiet. Someone had wanted this to happen. By the second day, the assassinations began. The first was dismissed as coincidence. A senior hydrodynamics engineer at a St. Petersburg design bureau, officially retired, was found dead in his apartment, the victim of what police described as a heart attack. He had no history of heart disease. His phone, laptop, and personal notebooks were gone. The second death came 12 hours later. A mid-level procurement officer overseeing exotic alloy shipments to Syeverodvinsk slipped on icy stairs outside his dacha and broke his neck. Witnesses reported 2 men in plain clothes leaving the area moments earlier. By the third, no one was pretending anymore. A naval officer assigned to acoustic testing vanished en route to work. His car was found abandoned near the Gulf of Finland, engine running, driver's door open. The sea ice nearby showed signs of disturbance. Inside Russia's naval establishment, fear metastasized. Offices emptied early. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when unfamiliar footsteps approached. Old emails were deleted. Hard drives smashed. Men who had spent their lives safeguarding secrets suddenly realized they didn't know which secrets were already gone. The purges were unofficial, deniable, and ruthless. And they weren't working. What terrified Moscow most was not the content of the leak, it was its precision. NATO wasn't releasing anything publicly. There were no triumphant press conferences, no humiliating exposés. Instead, the alliance did something far more dangerous: it stayed quiet. Russian intelligence intercepts revealed frantic behind-the-scenes activity, classified consultations with Allied shipyards, simulation requests, undersea warfare exercises quietly rescheduled. The West was adjusting. That meant the data was credible. Inside a secure facility beneath the Kremlin, a special task group began reconstructing the leak in reverse, trying to identify who had access to every fragment NATO appeared to possess. The list was terrifyingly short. Fewer than 60 individuals across decades. Some were already dead. Others could not be located. One name surfaced again and again, circled in digital red by exhausted analysts: Captain First Rank Mikhail Antonov. Antonov had been a doctrine specialist, not a designer. A man obsessed with how submarines were used, not how they were built. He had disappeared 18 months earlier during what was officially described as a medical retirement. His files were sealed. His residence empty. His digital footprint scrubbed so thoroughly it suggested state-level erasure. Or preparation. As counterintelligence teams dug deeper, a horrifying possibility emerged. Antonov had not leaked the data directly. He had seeded it. Distributed fragments across time, space, and medium, embedding them into places only NATO would ever archive, ensuring discovery long after he was gone. A delayed action betrayal designed to outlive its author. This wasn't treason, one analyst whispered during a midnight briefing. This was strategy. By the end of the week, the president authorized measures that had not been used since the late Soviet era. Travel bans on naval engineers. Asset freezes without explanation. Quiet arrests conducted at night, families told nothing. Entire departments were reorganized overnight, leadership replaced with men chosen not for competence but for perceived loyalty. The submarine program, still officially non-existent, was halted indefinitely. In the Arctic, a vessel that had already passed sea trials was ordered to remain under the ice, silent and unseen, its crew unaware that their ship had become a liability rather than a triumph. Meanwhile, in NATO headquarters, analysts watched Russia devour itself and said nothing. The exposure was complete, not through headlines, but through fear. The ocean had given up a secret, and Moscow was discovering the most dangerous leaks are the ones you can't plug, because they are already inside the hull. By the time Moscow accepted that the leak could not be contained, the objective changed. It was no longer about stopping NATO from learning more. It was about erasing the why. Inside the Lubyanka, a new operational cell was formed under a designation so old it hadn't appeared in modern databases. No acronyms. No paper trail. Just a handful of officers whose careers were built on making people disappear without leaving diplomatic fingerprints. Their mandate was brutally simple: identify the originator, destroy all secondary vectors, and eliminate anyone who could explain the logic behind the leak. They called the operation Silt, what settles after the water looks calm. The Russians were not hunting a person. They were hunting a pattern. Every assassination, every disappearance, every frozen bank account was fed into a predictive model designed to map behavioral anomalies before the leak. Who had argued too hard in closed meetings? Who had questioned doctrine instead of execution? Who had requested access to archives they didn't technically need? Again and again, the same shadow appeared, not as a name, but as an influence. Captain First Rank Mikhail Antonov, officially retired. Unofficially erased. But his ideas were everywhere, woven into training memos, doctrine drafts, marginal notes in simulation reports. Antonov had never designed the submarine, but he had understood its meaning. He knew what it would do to balance, to deterrence, to the quiet assumptions that kept wars cold. And he had decided the world needed to know. What Moscow could not determine was whether Antonov had acted alone. That uncertainty terrified them more than NATO ever could. In Kiev, the leak was treated like a live grenade with the pin already gone. Ukraine's Naval Intelligence Directorate had not authored Black Current, but once Captain Andriy Kovalenko identified its nature, Moscow's suspicion became inevitable. For the Kremlin, nuance did not matter. Ukraine was the most convenient suspect, and convenience often became truth. Within 48 hours, Ukrainian cyber teams detected probing attacks unlike anything they had seen before, not broad infrastructure strikes, but surgical incursions aimed at personnel records, travel logs, medical files. Russia wasn't trying to cripple systems. They were building a kill list. Kovalenko went underground. Safe houses rotated every 12 hours. Communications reverted to burst transmissions and couriers. Even NATO liaisons were cut out unless absolutely necessary. Ukraine had learned the hard way that visibility was vulnerability. Then the first attempt came. A car bomb detonated outside an apartment building in Odessa, not Kovalenko's, but close enough to send the message. 2 civilians died. Russian media denied everything within minutes, blaming criminal smuggling networks. No one in Kiev believed it. The second attempt was quieter. A Ukrainian signals officer attached to an undersea monitoring station collapsed during a routine shift. Autopsy results cited a stroke. The TOC screen, classified, restricted, told a different story. Someone was cleaning house. The hunt accelerated when Moscow uncovered the unthinkable. Antonov was not dead. Satellite intercepts, human intelligence fragments, and a single mistake by an overconfident FSB handler converged on a grim conclusion: Antonov had defected years earlier, not to NATO, not to any intelligence service, but into obscurity. He had become a ghost. His final act hadn't been escape. It had been placement, embedding knowledge in systems that would outlast him, trusting that Ukraine, with its existential understanding of Russian power, would recognize the signal when it surfaced. That made Ukraine dangerous. That made Ukraine expendable. Orders were issued authorizing extraterritorial action with maximum deniability. No flags. No medals. No acknowledgement if agents didn't return. The Black Sea became crowded with shadows. What saved Ukraine was not strength. It was speed. NATO's silence was not indifference, it was calculation. The alliance quietly hardened Ukrainian undersea monitoring sites, provided passive defenses, rotated advisors without announcement. No headlines. No speeches. Just friction introduced into Russia's hunt. And then, unexpectedly, Ukraine struck back, not with weapons, but with exposure. A controlled secondary leak surfaced in a European think tank, not technical data, but context. A carefully anonymized analysis suggesting internal Russian fractures, doctrinal dissent, and the possibility of unauthorized strategic programs. Moscow erupted. The Kremlin accused the West of psychological warfare. Russian admirals turned on one another. FSB units began investigating naval intelligence, while naval intelligence began purging FSB liaisons. The hunters were now being hunted. Antonov's final gift had detonated, not a bomb, but distrust. By the time the assassination slowed, it was clear the source could not be erased. Too many fragments were already loose. Too many people knew why the submarine mattered, even if they didn't know how it worked. Russia could kill engineers, officers, analysts, but it could not kill an idea once it escaped the hull. Ukraine survived the hunt battered but intact, having learned a dangerous truth. In modern war, survival doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who leaks last, and lives just long enough for the leak to matter. The ocean remained silent. Above it, the balance of fear had shifted. No alarm sounded when the balance broke. There were no launches, no emergency sessions of the United Nations, no grainy satellite images of fire and smoke. The world above the ocean continued as it always had, markets opened, politicians argued, news cycles churned. Yet beneath the surface, something fundamental had collapsed. Russia's undersea deterrent, once the quiet spine of its strategic confidence, had become a question mark. And nuclear powers could not afford question marks. The first visible sign was absence. Russian ballistic missile submarines, long accustomed to predictable patrol rhythms, began vanishing from the patterns NATO had tracked for decades, not because they were more hidden, but because they were no longer trusted. Patrols shortened. Routes shifted erratically. Crews were rotated without explanation. Entire deployments were cancelled days before sailing. A submarine at sea required confidence, not just in steel and reactor, but in secrecy. Black current had poisoned that confidence. Russian commanders now faced an impossible dilemma. If the leaked data was incomplete, then overreaction risked exposing more through behavior. If it was accurate, then every patrol was compromised the moment it left port. Either way, deterrence eroded. Inside the General Staff, simulations began returning outcomes that would have been unthinkable months earlier. NATO anti-submarine warfare assets, once modeled as probabilistic threats, were suddenly scoring consistent early detections. Not because NATO had gained new weapons, but because it now understood where to look. Doctrine had leaked, not diagrams. That was the true damage. In Syeverodvinsk, work slowed to a crawl. Engineers hesitated before signing off on components, unsure whether their designs were already known, or worse, misunderstood, by foreign analysts. Every deviation from prior models required justification. Every justification required approval. Every approval passed through men terrified of being wrong. Innovation died quietly in that environment. The flagship submarine, still unnamed, still officially non-existent, was quietly mothballed beneath Arctic ice. Its crew was reassigned without explanation. The vessel itself became a ghost ship, perfectly capable, strategically useless. No announcement was made. None was needed. Within naval circles worldwide, the message spread with ruthless efficiency: Russia's next-generation undersea advantage had failed without ever being challenged. Ukraine felt the aftermath differently. For Kiev, survival did not bring relief, only vigilance. The assassinations tapered off, replaced by something colder: restraint. Russia no longer hunted Ukrainian officers aggressively, not because it forgave them, but because escalation now carried unacceptable risk. Ukraine had become entangled in NATO's undersea awareness network, not formally, not publicly, but functionally. Its sensors fed alliance models. Its analysts attended closed-door briefings. Its waters became strategically relevant in ways Moscow could no longer ignore. This was protection. It was also exposure. Kiev understood the price. In the new equilibrium, Ukraine would never again be a peripheral player. It had become a node, valuable, watched, indispensable, and therefore perpetually vulnerable. Still, it had lived. That alone altered the calculus. The greatest consequence unfolded not in Moscow or Kiev, but in quiet rooms across the world. Naval planners in Beijing. Defense ministers in Paris. Submarine designers in Seoul. Analysts everywhere replayed the same lesson: the ocean is no longer opaque. Not because technology had suddenly conquered physics, but because secrecy itself had changed. Systems now outlived loyalty. Archives remembered what men tried to forget. Data, once seated, waited patiently for the right eyes. Black Current became a classified case study in multiple capitals, not for what it revealed about Russia, but for what it revealed about vulnerability. No firewall was absolute. No platform was truly silent. No secret was permanent. And no missile had been fired to prove it. Somewhere in Europe, in a city that did not appear in any official report, an old man watched the river move past his window. He had no rank now, no country that claimed him. His name existed only in fragments, redacted or mispronounced. He followed the news carefully, not headlines, but margins. Changes in language. Shifts in posture. The absence of certain words. He knew when it was over. The submarine he had helped unmake would never sail as intended. The doctrine he had feared would never fully mature. The balance had tilted, not toward peace, but away from inevitability. For him, that was enough. The ocean kept its silence. The world above it learned, too late, that the most decisive wars are not won with explosions, but with patience, placement, and a single quiet anomaly no one was supposed to hear.